Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, MCing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.
Oh, yes, you can. Oh, yes, you can. What's going on, world? It's yours truly, Mazi Mutafa, Executive Director of Words, Beats, and Life, here for episode 20 of No New Leaders. I'm joined by my brother from another mother and another father, Dr. Jason Nichols. What's going on, Jay?
Hey, man, ain't nothing going on but the rent, you know.
Every single week you say the same thing. We got to get you something new going on.
Well, you know, I mean, hey, I'm blessed. Heart is still pumping. You know, blood is still running. You know, so I'm happy. I was with a good friend of mine at the VA hospital, and I was seeing, you know, your wife's old stomping grounds. And,
no doubt. I saw that photo.
When you see folks and they're struggling, you know, with certain things, it puts things in perspective. So, like, you know, whatever it is going on, I still feel blessed, and I'm glad to be here with my brother.
Well, speaking of which, I want to send healing energy out to our co-host Greg Corbin. His son's not feeling well. He's got a little bit of a fever, so he's not with us today because he's there doing his daddy duty. So shout out to them. I wanted to, you know, per usual, we're kind of responding to the news like a lot of people, but maybe with a slightly different point of view. I named this show Prime Time or Nation Time, and that was a name given to me by a good friend, Macau, who's going to do an article for our blog about this kind of Deion Sanders controversy. But to be honest, it's not really about Deion. It's at least not for me. It's really about this kind of, well, a question, because this is a show about leadership, and one of the questions, at least that I have, is what is the purpose of Black leadership today? Is it to actually serve the Black community, or is it to use service to the Black community as a stepping stone towards greater aspirations? And I say this as a person that runs an organization, been here for 20 years. My co-founders, 3 of which are Black, one of which is white. We're a majority Black staff serving majority Black students, but I don't consider us a Black business, mostly because I don't want people, the other kinds of people that we serve, to feel like they're not part of the vision for the future of this organization. Like when we host a B-Boy Jam, the overwhelming majority of people that show up are Asian American and Latino. When we host a Paint Jam, the overwhelming majority of artists that show up are white. When we host a concert, the overwhelming majority of the audience is Black. So like this idea that, to me, hip hop, of course, with black roots and Latino roots, but serving a whole human family, I think there's value in that. You know, I think there's value in trying to create spaces where humanity can gather and be inspired and contribute in ways that matter, especially if humanity acknowledges the roots, but understands that the branches that come from the tree can have different kinds of flowers or different kinds of fruit, you know? Like, and I've seen this personally, traveling around the world with you, traveling to Brazil, traveling to South Africa, traveling to Korea, that hip hop is a global phenomena that has its roots in communities in New York or in California, depending on who you ask. But media has taken it all over the world. And so as long as people know, and that's part of our responsibility, is to teach them the history that they're not learning on radio, that they're not learning through music videos about kind of where it comes from and who created it and why it was created. Because so much of the conversation is about who, but not why. And I feel like part of our responsibility is to explain, you know, the values of peace, love, unity, and having fun for a community that was decimated through violence of poverty. you know, and so understanding. So anyway, I wanted to talk about that with you, especially because, you know, Jason and I, for those of you who don't know, we met 25 years ago in African American studies classes where we would often have rigorous debates about books that he would have read and that I would listen to his arguments and just argue against his arguments, having not done the reading. So I got to be transparent. He would often win those debates, but it was only because he did the reading, not because he was smarter. So Jason, I wonder what do you think about this? Like, as neither one of us went to an HBCU, but I think that, like, honestly, I've been inspired looking at what Deion has been doing and the winning record and seeing the stands filled with throngs of excited people all over the internet celebrating the idea that this major star from the NFL would go to be the head coach at Jackson State University, and that I think they have an undefeated record this year. Yeah. And that rather than continuing to build momentum to continue to get the sponsorship deals that he's been able to get for the school, like, I think HBCU games are about to start being broadcast nationally, thanks to, I don't remember his name, but the brother that owns the Weather Channel. He actually brokered a deal to get HBCU games broadcast nationally. Like, it seemed like there's all this momentum going, and then the person who's getting, rightly or unfairly, the credit for some of that is like, no, I'm out. I'm going to Colorado. They can pay me more. You know, it's his version of, I'm taking my talents to South Beach.
Well, you know, I have a different perspective than you on a lot of that. I think you are right, for example, with your organization, that you have certainly served a multitude of people, and that you are a Black-led organization, but not a Black organization in the sense that you don't just serve only Black people. But what you do, you do serve Black communities. You do serve Black communities within DC. And so this idea that Coach Prime, when he goes to Colorado, that he's no longer going to be serving Black communities, I think is a faulty idea. You know, I serve Black communities and I'm not at a HBCU. You know, I think you still serve, he's still going to be sitting up in somebody's grandmama's house telling them, I'm going to take care of your son. I'm going to do my best to make sure he graduates. I'm going to make sure that he gets the best education possible. And I'm going to do my best to give him an opportunity to play professional football. You know, to me, he's still trying to serve Black communities. Is he trying to serve HBCUs? I think it's a different story. My thing is, you know, when you do your service, the question is, first of all, I don't think this is about money for Prime. I think Prime has money. You know what I mean? I honestly don't think this is like the $5 million a year. I do think he is trying to get his assistants paid, which Jackson State couldn't afford to do. And that's understandable on Jackson State's side of it. But it's also understandable that his assistants are like, yo, I got a family, I got bills to pay. You know what I mean? Like, I need to work at the Verizon store or something, or I gotta, you know, this isn't enough. And I can understand that perspective. Like, yo, let me take these guys, let me get these guys, you know, the kind of pay that they deserve for the quality of work that they do. The other thing is, you know, how much service do you have to do? Like, he, as you stated, all that he did for HBCU sports, all he did for Jackson State in particular, bringing ESPN Game Day, bringing national attention, bringing Snoop Dogg to some campus in Mississippi, you know, making them arguably the most covered school in Mississippi, which has Ole Miss and Mississippi State and Southern Miss, has 3 football schools, other football schools, and he with Jackson State was arguably the most talked about, or at least equivalent with Mississippi State and Ole Miss. You know, I think he did a service, and I still believe that Jackson State is going to get another big name coach. I think that the next coach, there's somebody out there who has played in the NFL, who's a high profile guy, who wants to get into coaching, but knows they're not going to get a Power 5 job out the gate. They know they're not going to get, because we got to remember, Deion came from high school. He was coaching high school. You know, they're not going to get a Power 5 job out the gate. They're not going to get an NFL job out the gate. They're not even going to get an XFL job out the gate. But they can get that HBCU gig. And Jackson State is the kind of place right now with the light shined on it. People are going to want to see what they can do without Deion. So I think they're going to get another high-profile coach. I think Deion did an incredible service to HBCU sports. And the question is, does he owe Jackson State more? Now, you mentioned.
Oh, let me jump in. Because so this is why we've been friends for all these years. To be honest, I really don't know why we've been friends all these years, because we disagree about so much. But I think it's because we never take our disagreements personally. So a couple of things, right? So you just made the case for how his presence was transformational, that he brought more attention, more light than any other HBCU in the country. And then you pivoted to say, but you know, it's okay for him to leave. And so from my own point of view, as a person that actually really doesn't even watch college sports, the only reason why I know about this is because I follow. Actually, there's a few reasons why I know about this. It's because of social media. So that whole "give me my theme music," that whole trend where everybody was using his voice and had the theme, like, got me hype. I was like, yo, this is fly. So that's first. But second, you made the case for what he as an individual could do for one institution through his relationships and his own level of skill. The next coach is unlikely to bring that same level of relationship and ability with corporate sponsorships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I say unlikely because he's not the first former NFL player to go and be a coach at an HBCU. We got Doug Williams was a coach at an HBCU that never got this kind of shine, never got this, and he won a Super Bowl. I mean, I know Brian won a couple of Super Bowls too, but he won a Super Bowl, and he wasn't able to bring this kind of.
Does, but yeah.
What'd you say?
I said he didn't have the flair and personality that Prime does. Same. Eddie George is coaching right now. He's a Hall of Famer. He's coaching at Tennessee State, but he's not Prime. You know what I mean?
Right. And so the question, your question was like, what does he owe to HBCUs? And that's, to me, this is part of the problem, right? It's not about him owing. It's about what kind of a difference does his presence make. You actually made the case for the difference that his presence made that he's not going to have at Colorado. Colorado don't need that. And so, like, rather than making it about service or about institution building, like I saw a good friend of mine was like, Jackson State ain't no black business. It's just a black college. It's owned by the state. And it's like, bruh, like I've been thinking about this institution question for a couple of weeks now. I just looked up what is an institution, because I had a question of like, does an institution have to be old in order to be an institution? Are there new institutions? And so I looked up like what qualifies as an institution according to the definition, and it was universities, and it was churches, and fraternities and sororities for Black communities. In terms of thinking about institutions, you could also probably qualify some of the legacy civil rights organizations like the NAACP or the Urban League as institutions. But that's kind of it, bro. Like, there's no business institutions that are Black-owned businesses, Black-run, Black-serving, Black anything. And so recognizing how few opportunities there are for us to build institutions, and how few, in fact, institutions there are for us to invest in, to be invested in, to transform our lives and communities. I think it's not about, for me, it's not about does he have to do it. It's really about what kind of difference did he make in just a couple of years, and could he have continued to make over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years? That for me, that's the so, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
I hear what you're saying, and number one, there are a couple things that I think go into this. Is I think he's also thinking about his son's career, because you got to remember his son was his quarterback, Shedeur Sanders. I think he wants to get his son and a few other players that he's probably going to take with him, an even bigger stage, you know. But that aside, I would never, if you got an offer from the Red Cross to be their executive director, I would never say, Mozzie, you need to stay with WBL and serve, DC, the Black and brown communities and Asian communities in DC. Well, I would
Because
be
you've
like,
already told me to leave before. He was like,
well,
yo,
no,
I don't know why
I
you're doing this so long, bro.
That's not exactly. I'm saying you have served that community well. You've done many things, and there's more to do. I'm not saying there's more to do, but if you were like, maybe this is another challenge that I'm interested in, and there's some, nonprofit that has, $100 million budget, and they want Mazi Mustafa to run that nonprofit. I wouldn't be like, I certainly wouldn't make it a loyalty thing. How dare you leave? You know what I mean? I'd be like, you have every right to grow, because you have served this community well for 20 years, and I watched it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you mentioned LeBron, right? And I compare, when I think of what Prime did, I think about LeBron's second stint in Cleveland. He came back to Cleveland. He stayed there, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 seasons. And he won a championship. And that was the first championship that Cleveland had won ever, in any sport. Like, they don't win championships in Cleveland. He brought them a championship in 2016 against all odds. And people talk about Kyrie. That was all LeBron. I watched that. That was all LeBron with a little dash of Kyrie on top. And my thing is, LeBron brought that, and the people of Cleveland were grateful for what he did. And then they gave him their blessing to move on and go to Los Angeles. Now, the first time they were like, yo, you didn't, they were angry because he didn't accomplish the mission. He never won the championship. He just went to South Beach and then won a bunch of championships. And they thought he took the easy way out. But when he came back, it was all on his shoulders, and he got the job done. And the people of Cleveland, to this very day, stand on their feet when LeBron comes in the building, because they know LeBron did them a service. Now, they could have been like, we could have won 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 championships. Why did LeBron leave? They didn't do that. And I think it's the same sort of thing. He came to Jackson State. He brought lots of attention, not only to Jackson State, but to other SWAC schools and other HBCUs. He made it so that HBCUs were viable recruiters for 4- and 5-star recruits. And he brought a championship, an undefeated season, to Jackson State when Jackson State was actually at the bottom of the SWAC. They didn't challenge Southern and FAMU and any of those schools, and Alabama A&M. Those schools dominated Jackson State until these last 2 years. He brought something to that community that's a struggling community. And, he's accomplished what I think he set out to accomplish. So I think the other part of this is, again, I'm not an HBCU guy, so I'm going to tread a little bit lightly. Not really, but I'm not an HBCU guy. But one of the things that I will say is that a lot of people are talking about the money. If what will keep Jackson State in the news, keep Jackson State and other HBCUs viable athletically, which of course the sports bring money to other things, is if you look up next season without Prime and those stands are still filled. Keep the stands filled. Keep going to the games. This is where the responsibility, and this goes to leadership. You are one of the people who always says that we shouldn't look for a savior. It's not the one leader. It's all of us. It's us doing the work. So if you want to see HBCU sports continue to flourish, don't make it all about Prime.
But the problem is that it's not all about Prime. So even so there's a few things, right? there's a few differences. So the taking his talents to South Beach example of LeBron, right?
Mhm.
That's a NBA franchise. It wasn't a black-owned franchise. It was for the city of Cleveland,
Mhm.
right? So that's one difference. One, we're talking about an institution for a community that is a black institution. We can argue about ownership, but it's a black serving, black led entity that exists in the state that has the largest percentage of black residents in it. I looked it up before this. It's 36.1%. So it's the closest thing to an almost majority black population in the state. Versus, I know Texas has the literal largest population, but that group of black folks is 14% of the total population,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though it's numerically larger.
Jackson is 72% black, the city.
And so we're having a conversation about the impact of one person who brought resources, attention, and winning. And so if you say that, well, it's of course it's not about one man, but it is about the difference that one man made. That his ability to get corporations, there still needed to be an institutional partner on the other side to receive those resources. So he helped them as an institution raise money. That him leveraging relationships with the sports media broadcasting world got literal anchors and shows to film from Jackson that had not been there at any other HBCU. My point is not that he is the savior or the one. My point is it's really disappointing that rather than going to Jackson to build a real legacy that's transformational for that overwhelmingly majority black city and college, he decided that going after a paycheck for himself, even if it's not a bigger paycheck, it was a paycheck for his for his coach. Like if he had continued to do what he was doing, his folks would have got paid later. Like nobody who's working for him is on. My point is that ultimately, yes, Jason, it was a sacrifice, but it was a sacrifice that was paying dividends not just for him, but for the students and the city and the college. That it's bigger than him, and I'm saying he's not going to have that kind of impact at a predominantly white institution in Colorado. He's not. And so the question, like, and I feel like your answer to this question is no. So my question is, do black leaders, in particularly black institutions, have an obligation of service that's beyond their own personal benefit?
So my answer to that is yes, that we all have a responsibility. And again, what I would say is what happens with Jackson State and other HBCUs, whether it's FAMU, Hampton, Howard, Alabama A&M, any of those schools, Southern, Grambling, what happens in the future, and it's an argument that men make about the WNBA. If you want to see them continue, then it can't be, I only watch because of Prime, and Prime should have stayed. You should continue to support HBCUs. Go to games, not just homecoming. Go and put your dollars, write a check. You know what I mean? This is something a lot of people got upset with me because I'm not comparing it to the white institutions. The white institutions are the white institutions. They're older. They, a lot of them are private, totally different. But, 70%, I was just looking at the statistics, 70% of black physicians and dentists come out of HBCUs. There's some money there. I'm not saying it's a ton, and I understand that there's a lot of debt. All of that is valid, but there's some money. Continue, if you want to see a big name coach, come to your HBCU or someone who played in the NFL and who has, the swagger like Prime and all. I don't know if anybody has swagger like Prime, but somebody comparable, then keep going to the games. You want to see the big recruits, the Travis Hunters, go to HBCUs. Keep going to the games. Go to 3 or 4 games in your whatever HBCU is in your area. Write your HBCU. If you're an HBCU graduate, write them a check. Whatever you can afford. $20, $20,000. You know what I'm saying? I think we've got to start looking at how can I contribute, not I'm so disappointed that he didn't continue to contribute. And I definitely think, Prime did something that got us all, quote unquote, woke. We all like, whoa, HBCU football. I watched the highlights on YouTube, but I watched every highlight reel of Jackson State. I watched every single game. They have like the condensed games into 15 minutes. I watched every single one. I would have never watched that before. And guess what? Next season, I'm curious as to what Jackson State is going to do under their new coach. I'm also curious to what Colorado is going to do. I'm going to pay attention to both. But, if Jackson State starts losing, they could lose me. But the whole point is, like, there are opportunities to keep this movement going. He started it. He didn't have to be Eddie Robinson. You've had great coaches at HBCUs. Eddie Robinson is the winningest coach in Division I football, I believe. Him or Joe Paterno. You've had great coaches. You've had great players. By the way, Sweetness is a Jackson State graduate. So you've had great players coming out of Jackson State, arguably the greatest running back of all time, Walter Payton, Sweetness. So I think we've just got to, you see the momentum that's been started, just like Cleveland, and by the way, Cleveland's about 53% black, the city. But, all right, peace, LeBron, do your thing. We've got our championship. Now we're going to rebuild, and we realize we can do this, and we can do this without you if need be. And they've got a decent team. They're better than the Lakers this year. So I just think putting it all on one man.
But I'm not. I'm talking about the difference that one man can make. I'm talking about the difference that, and not diminishing that just by saying, well, of course he has, like, he wasn't a slave to Jackson State. He could leave whenever he wants to. It's a job. Mm-hmm. But I am suggesting that some jobs are different than others. That the difference you can make in one community, literally saving the lives of young people versus enhancing the lives of young people, that they're not the same.
Can I ask one question?
You can ask any question you want.
And this is, again, this is a hypothetical, but let's say it's that whole, Red Cross or whatever. And, you're at WBL, you're working really hard, but the people around you, a couple of times you've had to miss payroll, because, and you yourself have had to, I know over the years, I know the story. So I know you've had to not pay yourself sometimes just in order to pay other people. The people close to you, and the Red Cross says, bring your staff, bring who you want. And you can get those people 6-figure paydays that have been working for $15 an hour, that are struggling to pay rent. Would you pass that up?
Yeah, because I would actually. And I have. I've actually been offered multiple jobs paying me 2, 3, 4, and 5 times as much as what I make right now. And they could guarantee me a check every 2 weeks. And I passed it up for a few reasons. One, because the Red Cross is a 100-plus-year-old institution. So it's a federal line. It's a line item in the federal budget. It's an institution of institutions. I'm not interested in managing somebody else's institution. I'm interested in building one. I'm interested in going through the struggles that it takes to actually do the things that we think should exist in the world. Mm-hmm. And I'm not holding everybody to that standard, but I am saying if in 2 years you could do all of this, what could you have done in 4? What could you have done in 5? And to be honest, again, like, remember, this is prime time or nation time, right? That's the topic, because it's not about him, but it is. But looking at this as a microcosm of a kind of, black elite that have been trained to go in to work on behalf of our people, to prove their ability to then be able to move up to go and work for somebody else. I think that there's a problem with that. And I think that the ultimate problem is that if all our people ever get is the testing ground, how do we ever stop being the testing ground? Like, he literally had the ability to make attending Jackson State comparable to attending Colorado, not in terms of resources, not in terms of any number of other factors, but in terms of the attention, the winning, the coaching, the community. There's so many things. Like, how do we ever actually get from being an underclass if those of us that have access don't use that access to bring more of us out from under? You know what I'm saying? Like, I get what you're saying, and I'm not saying that your point is negated by mine, but I'm saying I've looked at those opportunities in the face and said, "No, I'm good, bro," because I'm trying to build something, and I don't want to look back on my life and say, "You know what I did with the last 30 years of my life is I worked for somebody else to continue something that didn't need me." You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
knowing the difference that I can make in my community through my own efforts with people that are committed in the same way, I think it means something. I think it means something.
I'm with you in a lot of respects. As you know, my second job is to do a lot of commentary, and I work for, I do it on a lot of different networks. I technically work for one, but non-exclusive. But I would love to build my own YouTube presence. You know what I mean? Guess what? I don't really get the support. You know what I'm saying? And I do, and this is a little different in Prime. He doesn't need the money. I think it's about the challenge. I actually do need some money. I think I understand the satisfaction of building something. To me, it is, though, with those people that have been really loyal. And the idea, first of all, the only thing that I'll disagree with is that someone like you with your talents can't come and take this institution that, by the way, if we're talking about the Red Cross, for example, the Red Cross has had its issues over the years and could totally, be transformed and fixed and made into a better organization that serves people better. So the idea, hey, I got to build something with my own hands and there's nothing I can do for the Red Cross, I think it's the wrong attitude. I think it's, it's like if you have to like build your mud hut, right? Or you see a bunch of bricks, and cement. You still have to build the house, but you have more tools, you have more implements, and you have more materials to actually build the house. I understand if they're like, hey, it's just plug and play. But if they're like, we need to be radically transformed, and we think you're the guy to do it because we've seen you build an organization from the bottom up. To me, that's useful. I can understand if that's not your mission. So I'm not putting that on you, but the idea that like, oh, the Red Cross doesn't need me, they wouldn't come to you if they didn't need you. You know what I'm saying? They obviously felt like we need new leadership, and this is the type of leader that we want.
I hear you, Jay. I think my point, though, is that when I look back over my life and I think about what it is, like that question I just asked, like, do you have any idea how enraging it is to me to know that we've been in this country for 400 years and the only institutions we have are colleges, churches, and sororities and fraternities? Like, really? Like that are decently funded, large scale in terms of membership? Like, bro, like that it should bother us on a scale that it doesn't. Like, I don't even think it even resonates. Like is even a thing that occurs to people. Like, what are the true Black institutions in the United States of America? We don't have large scale import export businesses where we can be doing commerce with brothers and sisters in the Caribbean on a continent. We don't have large scale like I'm sounding a little bit like Ye right now, but he's only talking about in fashion. I'm talking about period. Like, everybody's upset about water in Midwest and Southern states. We don't own no companies to be able to go fix that. We don't own the water filtration systems, no place, no companies that build the parts, no, like, bro, like, and I get it that, companies exist in a capitalist system to meet needs, no doubt. What are the companies that we're building, scaling, being funded by? Like, they're just real questions about our own. Like, many of my friends are focused right now on farming, like this idea that you need to produce your own food to be able to feed yourself in case there's no more grocery stores or whatever, which I think on some levels sounds silly, but on some levels is brilliant. It's brilliant, the idea to say, well, I'm saying it's silly to say there's not going to be more supermarkets. That's silly. But because people that produce need to distribute, that's what they do.
Growing your own food is like printing your own money. That's what somebody told me.
Yeah, that person is silly.
No,
I'm kidding. My question though is about scale, about about like we have multiple businesses, multiple entrepreneurs. What are those folks doing to pool some resources to build some things that are bigger? That scale matters, and that the work that he was doing on the field, managing a set of young men towards victory, built momentum towards the institution actually becoming stronger. And I think to dismiss that and say, well, somebody else could do that. You've made the case. It's so interesting. Like, from my own point of view, you're making my case for me by arguing, no, we've had winning coaches. We've had to, and those folks didn't do what Prime did in a year, in 2 years. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, this is where your normal argument around leaders matter, like, is a great argument in this case. This would be a great example of how instituting or bringing in one new leader who brings in support staff to be able to help implement a vision can actually have a greater impact. But again, my point is not about Jackson State. My point is about, does there come a point where being Black and working in a Black space isn't about a testing ground? It really is about building institutions. Like this, I think it's Dr. Clark said that, I'm gonna butcher the quote, but it's basically like the goal of every person should be to build institutions that inspire young people generations from now. Like, what are we doing to build those things that our great grandchildren look at and be like, wow, when Dr. Nichols did blah blah blah, like, I'm so glad that this thing is here. Like, how are we really preparing our own folks to be able to provide for themselves? Not in like a separatist point of view, but like, how, like, if we're the primary producers of culture, how come we're not the primary distributors? These are not like radical ideas, but they are questions that make you say, like, how come what he did is okay for a lot of people, as opposed to being like, this is a repeated pattern of self-sabotage that diminishes the strength of the few institutions that we have.
So let me say this. First of all, I guess my first question, or maybe I should say my question for the end. So I agree with you. I think your vision of what HBCUs are is a lot Blacker than they really are in terms of who controls them and, you know, and what they actually are, you know. And I mean, we can go, of course, we know those HBCUs were, if I'm not mistaken, mostly founded by whites, right?
They were.
You know, I know Howard, you know, was named after Otis Howard, who was a white man. They were just sympathetic whites. And they are still, you know, like we said, dependent upon the state and federal government for funding. And a lot of the education, I remember.
Which isn't a problem, because we pay state and federal taxes. That's our money that we're getting back.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is they're not some sort of independent Black creation.
I'm not arguing that they are.
No, I didn't say you were arguing that they are. I'm just saying, you know, I think we have this idea that HBCUs are like UNIA universities, and they're not. You know what I mean? Like, they're like Marcus Garvey creations. They're not. They never were. And the education that you get there isn't necessarily a ton Blacker than the education you're going to get at a lot of other places. And what I mean by that is, like, you know, for example, we remember years ago at Hampton when they were saying you couldn't have locks if you were a man and be in the business school. Like, they have some of the same white supremacist, like, you know, standards that you would get at a PWI. But they are a place where lots of Black people congregate and lots of Black people get opportunities. And so one perspective is Prime opened the door. And now another coach who might not get an opportunity to coach Division I is going to have an opening to coach at a university that has the country spotlight. There are people walking around with Jackson State University paraphernalia on around the country because of Prime, not because they went to Jackson State. Now there's going to be somebody with a national, who's going to move into a program, and a Black coach who's going to come up and have an opportunity to coach at a university, at a Division I school with a national profile that would not have had that opportunity before. That's the dope thing about HBCUs. That's the dope thing. A lot of, whether it's professors and scientists and others who didn't get opportunities other places. My grandfather was one, did not get the kind of opportunities he wanted, and started in HBCU and taught at Hampton University and Morgan State. I think that's the dope thing about HBCUs. And in this particular case, you had Prime, and Prime moved on, shined a light on Jackson State, and now some other young coach or old coach who wouldn't get an opportunity is going to get an opportunity to come into Jackson State. And I think that's another perspective to look at it. And I guess my question for you is, and I don't know anything about, Prime's situation, but what if your wife said you were working at a nonprofit in Jackson, Mississippi, and your wife is like, I done had my fill of Jackson, Mississippi. I done had a fill of being in a city where I can't even take a shower or open my mouth when I take a shower because the water is messed up. Would you move on then?
No, I wouldn't. Because I think that at the end of the day, I think we have a different value set, right? That if I was married to a woman who told me to choose her over my purpose,
I didn't say that.
or to choose her comfort, or to choose whatever, however you want to frame it.
Consider. How about not choose?
But I wouldn't. But the answer is I wouldn't, and I wouldn't for a whole range of reasons, including the fact that just because I was going to ask, and I think you actually answered my question with your question. I was going to ask, are you one of those folks that thinks that our obligation to young folks who live in impoverished communities is to help them get out, or to help transform those communities? My answer would be our responsibility is to transform those communities, because it's not just about who can escape, but it's about, so if the water's not drinkable in Jackson and he can leave, great for him. If he had to stay, he would actually probably work to try to actually change it.
Yeah. So one of the things about Prime is he actually did criticize the mayor and the government, and they went back and forth. I actually like them. I've never met him, but I've seen him speak. Chukwueze Lumumba. I actually like the mayor of Jackson, and I think I think Prime was wrong to criticize Chukwueze, because he's a mayor of a majority Black, poor city, in poorest major city in the country, in the poorest state in the country, and then be like, magically fix these problems that they ask the state government, and the state government doesn't help because the state government is the state government of Mississippi, and they're dealing with majority Black, majority Democratic Jackson.
Right.
So Blaine, I thought Prime was wrong there, but obviously for what you're saying, you think Prime was right. I would say, now I will say this, I do, where we do differ, I do consider my wife's comfort. That's a fact. Now, is it my deciding factor? If I think it's my purpose, then I'm gonna explain to her, no, this is my purpose. But do I consider her comfort? Absolutely. And I think you do too, honestly. I think you consider your wife's comfort. I've seen it. I think you do. I don't think that you have to move out of a community You know what I mean? I think it is important to try to transform communities. And I would argue that when we're talking about HBCU sports, and particularly Jackson State, Prime did that. He came in and took a cellar dweller and took them to the SWAC championship, and they were 12-0. Like, he literally transformed the program. So it's like, should he get a couple more SWAC championships? I mean, yeah, he could, but if he wanted to challenge himself, just like you're challenging yourself on building WBL. But if your challenge is, yo, the Red Cross is in shambles, and I can rebuild it and make it respectable again, this enormous multinational nonprofit, I think that's a fair challenge if that's what you want to do. I also respect you staying. My thing is, I'm not telling Prime he shouldn't stay. If he wanted to stay, I would say absolutely stay if he felt like his job wasn't done there. But I also understand how he could view it and say, I did something really important for HBCU sports. Now I can move on.
Well, so what about this question about institution building? How does that happen if the brightest and the best continue to be courted away to larger, primarily white institutions? Oh, you know what? I actually don't want to let something slide that you said. So, no, it's not like that. But you said something. You said it earlier. It was particular. Oh, that HBCUs aren't as black as I'm giving them credit for being, in terms of their founding and their leadership and who gives money, et cetera. Right? Which was interesting because it felt like part of your argument was, well, if these are the only three institutions we got, this one ain't that good anyway. Versus, like, it is what it is, but it's one of the three that we have. So it feels like, let's suppose that what you're saying is true, right? Let's just suppose that your arguments around respectability politics and Black beauty standards are barriers that exist in Black institutions, right? Let's just accept that these are factual things you were talking about, not just hyperbole. So what? Like, we still have the ability to actually change policy, to change leadership, to be advocates. It's part of the reason why every single year at Howard University, students are protesting around dorm life, around financial aid, et cetera, but they're not dropping out and going to Maryland. They're actually fighting to actually transform the place that they are. And so how do we talk about building institutions if what we primarily have is critiques or criticisms or arguments for why they could be better, but we're not actually putting in the sweat equity, not necessarily putting in the intellectual equity, not necessarily putting in the time to actually build those things? And you don't have to respond as if I'm attacking it, because I want to, rather than have you go back to the thing that you said, I'm only bringing it up because I didn't respond because I wanted to let you finish talking. Because for me, it's about this bigger question of, let's begin from the base level of, our institutions are not perfect and they can be changed. My question becomes, how do we actually make them better and change them if we're not actually invested in their growth and development, if we're not willing to put in the work that's necessary to see them be more of what it is that we need? So, like, that question I was asking about what kind of industries are we building, I feel like that's a seminar course at an HBCU that should be happening. Probably is happening and I don't know about it. Like, how are we building institutions? You said that they're not Garveyite institutions. How could they be more involved and invested in diaspora-focused economies? I know people in Africana studies departments who are talking about history and culture in that context. Is that also happening at the business school? Probably, because many of the people at the HBCU came from the Caribbean and Africa and throughout the United States. So the question becomes, how do those things get more light and then actually get the startup capital and the investments that let them grow to actually have the kinds of impacts that are necessary to move forward? Like, I'm not arguing, like we went to the same college, you know what I'm saying? Like, and it wasn't an HBCU. But that doesn't mean I never understood its value. I went to Maryland, to be transparent. I applied to Maryland and 4 other HBCUs. I got rejected by all the HBCUs. I got into Maryland. And it wasn't because I was, going because I was super black before college, but it was just because that was an option that seemed like a good one. Like I was part of that generation that grew up on a different world and saw the value in an HBCU experience. I created my own HBCU experience at University of Maryland by being an African American Studies major, being the president of the Black Student Union, starting 4 different Black focused organizations and joining a Black fraternity. So I had a Black experience in a white space. But I understand I wasn't there to build that institution. I was there to learn from that institution how to build my own, how to invest in my own, how to support my own. And my own, for me, in a hip hop context, looks like something that is Black rooted, human serving.
Yeah, no, I think, what you've done obviously is incredibly admirable, and I'm definitely, a supporter.
No. But how do we move to the next phase is my question. How do we move from our institutions aren't perfect to how do we work towards actually making them stronger? That's my real question. How do we actually move in that direction?
I think there are so many things, and I think you're making my argument. In that, I think it is up to us to make those institutions stronger. And I think a lot of it is going to start with alumni. Alumni and other people in the community. If we're talking about a sports context, if you continue to support your Jackson State or your Howard University or your Bowie State or your Morgan State or your Coppin State basketball team, if you support those institutions, that's what helps them grow. That's what brings the attention, and that's what brings the recruits. If you bring a recruit into a basketball game, and he wants that Black experience in college, and he looks up and he sees a 5,000 seat arena and there's 600 people in it. Yeah, he's probably going to be like, I could go to the University of Maryland. But if he looks up and he sees it packed to the rafters and he sees people stepping, at halftime and all kinds of stuff, like he could very well get excited about joining that community and having that experience. I think the same thing that drove you with a different world image of Black colleges, that kind of experience is attractive to a lot of these young athletes too. They want to experience that too. So the way we get the kind of attention that brings those kinds of athletes in is by supporting. We can't keep putting it on others, on one person, on 2 people, on 5 people, on coaches. The support has to come from the community. And a lot of that is going to be, what resources can you provide? Don't necessarily think about it in terms of, okay, I can't write a $5 million check like the Kushner family. Like they wrote to Harvard to get Jared Kushner into Harvard. Yeah, you might not be able to do that. But if you're a dentist, you might be able to write a $500 check or maybe even a $5,000 check and say, hey, this goes to the athletic program. I really enjoy the basketball games. I really enjoy the football games. You come out, bring your friends and bring your family. You tailgate at those games. That's what we really need to do, because this is about community. It's not about Coach Prime. And he set an example. He was the catalyst. He lit the fire. Now it's up to us to wave that fire and keep it going and get it hotter. Throw a couple of other, logs in that fire. And for us to be like, well, Prime is gone and it's his fault. Now we're not going to the games. That's not institution building. Think about how we can build this institution up, if, both in a sports context and in other contexts. Because HBCUs, let me just say this one last thing. HBCUs, I didn't mean to diminish their importance for Black communities. You know what I mean? My grandmother went to a HBCU, is a Delta from the HBCU. Like lots of people in my family went to Howard or Hampton. So and ended up being really successful in life. I think HBCUs are fundamentally important. So I don't want anybody to be like, that's because he went to Maryland and he, chill out. I understand the importance of HBCUs. My thing is, it's on you, not on Prime. It can't just be Prime. It's got to be you and you and you and everyone who's watching, all 7 of you. I'm joking. But, everybody who's watching and may come across this has got to be, okay, one, there was they were going to name, before they named it World Party. No, I think it was after World Party. They actually did have an album, I think, called One Monkey Don't Stop No Show. Yeah. So One Monkey Don't Stop No Show. Let that monkey go off and fly to Colorado in that thin ass air.
You know what's funny? As we wrap up, no racial imagery, Black man going to Colorado.
Yeah. When I said monkey,
the one thing,
respect. I'm not trying to say he's a monkey.
I got you. We do agree is that people like me are upset that it could become inferno quick. Number one challenge is back to that question I was asking: can something be an institution? And the answer has also survived successive waves of communities. It means that it's not about it's actually a thing that has a set of that drive it, and that happens over time. What gleaned from this is an example of if a person, the community of people, to leverage relationships and resources, that it makes a difference, lasting difference for that few group of people. It has to be multiple waves of people. That's the thing that I walk away from this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And
take motivation, but understand it has to be about more than a person.
100%. We agree. I definitely think I hope Jackson State goes after big time coaches, doesn't try to settle, goes after or at least big people with serious potential, people who could bring attention or keep attention on HBCUs and on Jackson State. And hopefully they won't even look back at whoever coached before. They'll have a new coach, and maybe that coach will move on, and then they'll get a new one, just like all of the Power 5 schools do. They go through coaches like an average person goes through underwear. You know what I mean? If you're not winning, they find someone else. And they don't expect, one person to stay. They realize that person may move on to another Power 5 school. I don't necessarily think Prime is going to stay at Colorado for too long, because he's going to get his butt kicked at Colorado when he has to play USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington. Colorado is not a good team, and he's not going to turn it around overnight. I promise you, it's a different ball game. And I always love our background because those couches always look like slices of bread to me.
That's just because you're food. Even though I know that you have a good evening, Jason. Thank you. This has been another episode. Sorry, you would give a salute. Goodbye. Let me let you get a salute.
Okay. Salute.
You get. Thanks so much for joining leaders. Hopefully this was of value to you. Share it with folks in your the goal is not just to do it, but to impact. All right. Peace.